We're live.
We're back after a short break. Moving gears quickly to page 542 and activating to permanent testing in schools in Vermont for PCBs. And adding some testimony in people who have been through the process or various stages of the process, and you were able to come today. So for the record, you are.
I am Elaine Collins. I am the superintendent for North Country Supervisory Union. My 4th year in that position, my 36th year working in Northeast PM schools in a variety of different roles. Just to give you context, our schools range from Brighton Elementary on the east side to J. Westfield on the west side, 12 schools in between. There are 65 miles from one end to another, about 520 square miles. Spend a lot of time in my car. So we have about 2,630 students in North Country. Of the schools that are in our supervisory union, 5 of them actually had PCBs identified in them at various levels. Brighton Elementary School, Derby, Charleston, Newport City, and the high school. I'll give you just kind of like a superficial background around PCBs. It's a language that I hoped I would never learn and yet have been steeped in. So pre-K levels, the upper end of limit is 30. For K to 6 kids, the upper end limit is 60. And for 7th grade through adult, that number is 100. You can have anything between the upper limits to 3 times that level and still be in the room. When you reach the 3 times that amount, then you have to think about ways of not using those rooms or limiting your occupancy of those rooms.
So 30 means 90.
Right. So for pre-K students, that's 90. For K to 6, that would be 180. And for 7th grade through high school, that's 300. School action level would be above those upper limits, and then immediate action level is what it's referred to when it's 3 times the limit. So when air sampling happens, they basically come in, they inventory all of your materials, and they determine what rooms are similar, what rooms have the same univents, the same paint, the same building materials. They group those into groups, and then they test 30% of those rooms, and then say, extrapolate the data and say all the rooms in that data set, even if there are varying levels in that data set, you go with the upper limit, and that determines your occupancy. Okay. So my first year as a superintendent, testing happened. Welcome to the superintendency, and we found Charleston and Derby had PCBs identified in things like boiler room and electrical room. They did some mediation. They worked for the state. They got rid of the PCB containing materials. Newport City had PCBs in a janitorial closet. Nobody's spending time in the janitorial closet and in a girl's bathroom, and hopefully nobody's spending significant amounts of time in the girl's bathroom. So we didn't really need to do anything there. There were no identified materials that were outputting PCBs, but the numbers have continued to come down without identifying any outputting materials and without really doing anything. So they're just going to continue to test quarterly. Brighton had PCB levels that were the highest in their preschool room, ironically. So their numbers in preschool were about 200. And as you remember from my opening, 90 is the limit. And so that was in May of that school year. We had to end preschool early. And for K to 6 students, they had to limit their occupancy of the building to 27 hours a week. So thankfully May was nice and warm and we could get them outside for field trips and for other things. We never really identified a source in Brighton, which is also interesting, and did things like put in the air purifiers. Again, never identified a source, but the numbers continued to decrease to the point where we were able to bring pre-K back into the building, even though there was no source identified. My running theory is that they replaced their LED lights about 3 months before PCB testing happened, and dust if there's PCB containing dust in that project stirred up some PCBs in the air. Perhaps that's where the PCBs came from. All of those schools were about $500,000 for PCB mitigation efforts. We had pre-K off site for a year, the rental for the building, tried to get a modular in, that was a colossal failure. But it cost us some money, so about $500,000. And then I know you heard from my friend and colleague, Chris Young, yesterday, who's the principal of North Country High School. They, of course, have had the largest problem, and I'll kind of give you some timeline briefly. January of 23, the air tests were high. In spring of 23, we installed 134 carbon filters at about $150 a piece. Increased airflow was encouraged. More air tests done in August of 23. In September, more tests were done because the August numbers weren't great, and they confirmed that the data was getting worse and not better. In December, in the BNC wing, the doors, windows, and expansion joints were encapsulated, basically just like polyurethane to keep the PCBs in. And then in January 24, more tests. April 24, C wing, which is the Career Center classrooms, did some additional mitigation. May of 24, we gathered together with around 17 or 20 of us to plan basically a $3.2 million project in C wing. This high school is split into A wing, B wing, C wing. V wing is all academic. C wing is basically the Career Center. At that point, we were more concerned about Career Center. And so they said, well, just for kicks, let's test B wing again to see what happens. And my question of the day was, well, what happens if we test B wing and the numbers aren't good? And they said, well, let's plan for basically scaling up the project. So originally it was $3.1 million. It ended up being a $5.2 million remediation project. Through June and August, there were about 100 workers crawling around the B wing and C wing, basically painting all the walls a lovely institutional gray, and then taking the caulking out from around the windows and encapsulating that. August came around and the numbers weren't good. They were worse. So we had to plan for instruction, right? And kids coming back in several weeks, right? So all summer we were planning for what does it look like if the test results don't come back good. We had wedding tents, as it turns out. I know you heard from my friend, Mr. Young. Nobody says in schools, let's educate 720 kids in tents. That'll be a good time. But we really we prioritized right from the get-go that in-person learning was our priority. We knew, both of us, both Chris Young and I, had been principals during COVID and knew that we lost a lot of kids during COVID to remote instruction, and that we knew if we went remote that we would lose a lot of kids that we would never regain. So we prioritized whatever that would look like. We needed to be in person. And so we got 6 wedding tents. We set up, Tent Town, Tent City. We named them, decorated them as best as we could. Got over about a 2-week period, got floors, walls, heat, fans, Wi-Fi, electricity. It was a gargantuan effort and a lot of money, and we pulled it off. So kids came back to school a week later than anticipated. Staff was great. Parents were super grateful to have their kids in school. They, again and again said, thank God you didn't go remote. So that was horrible. So that was the summer of 2024. Last summer, we tested again, and the numbers were almost as high as the prior summer. And the difference between 2024 and 2025 is that we were able to use average air sample data instead of point in time, which was something we've been really fighting for the year before. There's a cynical part of me that thinks maybe because we were out of money that we were able to use average data points rather than point in time. Doesn't matter. We were able to use the school. We had a fair amount of pushback from our staff, right? Because how come 1,800, levels of 1,800 in our rooms weren't good last summer, but this summer we're able to use, right? This fall we're able to use them. It's a valid question. So Department of Health came up, Department of Environmental Conservation did a informational session with our staff and eased their worries. It feels as though, for all of the disruption, right? We're still in the same place now as we were when we originally got our numbers back, and we've spent a lot of money. So in the North Country Career Center and high school, we've got some additional projects during next week's April vacation. We have basically a roofing, the rubber mat that goes on top of the roof is going to be placed around the school. They did some soil sampling during school, did like basically a pneumatic drill and did 130 soil samples around the school. Wasn't interrupting at all to have this huge machine doing pneumatic drilling outside. But we got samples back that again were far exceeding the acceptable levels. It's something like 2 parts per billion, and we had again 1,800 as some of our higher limits. As far as 3 feet down, again 10 feet away from the building in the soil. So the theory is by putting the rubber mat down and then putting pea stone on top of it, that it will keep the univents from sucking that off-putting air back into the building. Hopefully it doesn't create other problems like, stormwater runoff or other things, but that's to be determined. It's about $135,000. Between the $135,000 for the rubber mat and the pea stones, the $560,000 that I just saw run through that had testing, independent consulting, we're at about $9 million between the $500,000 of the other 4 schools and the high school, and since 2023. We're at a point where we've sunk a lot of money into a building that we're likely going to have to rebuild. PCBs, the superstructure of the building has been tested. PCBs have concentrated in the middle of the concrete pillars. So, because that's where the windows touch the concrete pillars, and there's this off-putting and absorption all the time of things that have PCBs in them. And window caulking was the greatest emitter. So when windows are up against the concrete, which is porous, as you know, it absorbed the PCBs at the middle of the concrete column. And I'm not sure we would be able to carve out 5 inches from the middle of a concrete pillar that's holding up the building and still say that the structural integrity is sound, right? So that being said, it's a 60-year-old building. During the assessments of the building that Veritas did, was at 2022, the building was gauged to be at 94% used up, right? So we're going to have to do something different in the high school. Even if we were to remediate, it would cost us more to get rid of the PCBs and by hand or with mechanical tools, and it would be to just raise the building and start over in terms of PCB mitigation. It's about $21 million estimated to get rid of them through hand tools, 15 for mechanical tools, and then to raise the building would be about 12 million.
So 12 million to raise it, and how much to build it?
That's the question, right? 180, 200 million would be probably a great estimate. And we're under a timeline, as you know. Once you ring the bell, you can't unring the bell. EPA knows we have PCBs, and we'll either need to encapsulate them or renovate to the point where it's stable. Test in perpetuity, which is about $250,000 per year. And if there's any bleed through, we would be on the hook for trying to remediate or renovate. So let's say we were to put 21 million or even 15 million in, and 10 years down the road, we're going to have to do something large scale because they've come through again. Our voters would, write us out of town on a rail. So we're likely at a point where we're going to have to rebuild, and it would be wonderful if we could partner this PCB project, if it continues, with school construction aid, right? There are bound to be other schools like North Country that exist in Vermont. It's extraordinarily expensive, right? It's not just the testing, it's what happens when you find them, right? And so $9 million so far just in North Country, and we're not through it with the high school. And what other North Countries exist in the state? And if you're going to continue it, you have to sort of be prepared for that. It would be much more, it would be more thoughtful and planful, I would think, if you thought about those schools and said, okay, rather than putting $9 million into a building that we're probably going to have to tear down and start over, how about if we put some of that money towards school construction aid and help us to rebuild? And then, oh, by the way, while we're redistricting, is there a possibility of making this more of a regional high school, right? And so it's every problem also has opportunities embedded in it. The high school is a great opportunity for the legislature to look at the policy and the procedure that's put into place. There was very little forethought, nobody thought that we would be in the place that we are. No one considered what would happen when we got to this point. If we found PCBs, right, it was just, let's just test. And here we are. If 2 summers ago, PCBs literally consumed every moment of everybody's time. Every administrator at the high school, the 2 assistant principals, the high school principal, myself, there was nothing that we did that was educationally related except try to plan for in-person instruction and get rid of PCBs. So if the point is to help schools make them safer, then we need to have a longer term vision and need to think about carefully how much interruption the PCB program provides for kids in their schools. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
So obviously it's been emitting these PCBs since construction.
I would imagine, right? I think the theory is as the chemicals degrade, that there's more outputting that happens, and the school's been there for 60 years. So the science around PCBs is somewhat inexact because there's no, if you spend 10 years in a building at this level, you're going to develop cancer, right? Everybody's immune systems are different. Everybody's predisposition to developing cancer is different. Everyone comes at it with a slightly different variable. And there's PCBs everywhere. They're in the food that we eat. They're in the air that we breathe everywhere. They're not just in schools, but we're dealing with just schools right now, right? So, inexact science, somewhat.
How many kids at the high school?
720.
More than one. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
The inconsistency or the inexact science reminded me something else we had heard, I think last biennium, about the testing, or actually maybe I heard this when I went to one of my high schools, but the testing in your area, you found that it can be kind of all over the place, because what I've seen and heard is that at least in one high school, in one part of the school, the levels were super high at one point, and then shortly after they were super low, and then they were fluctuating all over the place. And can you share a bit more about the inexact science on it?
Well, so the EPA standard is really testing materials, building materials. It's not air. So air, as we all know, isn't static, right? It moves constantly. So the other thing to know about PCB testing is when you test in really hot, humid conditions, the numbers go way up, right? And so when you test in June and it's 90 degrees and humid outside, you're likely not going to have great test results. And that's what happened the summer of 24 when we needed to be intense. They tested in a week in June when it was 90 or 95, super humid out, and the test results were off the charts. It continued to be really humid that summer. They did the mitigation, and then actually when they retested, some of the numbers were higher after they did the mitigation, right? But it was still really humid in the building. So the thing that got us back in the building was that they put basically a zero gravity thing in each room, each classroom, zero gravity situation, and replaced the air 6 times an hour for 24 hours in every classroom. They had these massive wind tunnels in each classroom. And then that's what brought the results down. And it also was October at that, like the end of September, beginning of October. And what happens with the air temperature in northern Vermont, right, or anywhere in Vermont at that time, it starts to drop. Our nights were colder, and so the numbers came down enough for people to get in. you can't be intense when it snows, and we went back in the school building on October 15th and it snowed the next day. So, it was great timing for us to get back in the building, but seemed based on what happened in 24 and then based on what happened in 25, like time of year, air conditions, and you can have rooms that are right next to each other that sample vastly different. Who knows why? Maybe it's something that's in that room that is containing a PCB material, but one room you can use and the next room you can't. And the air knows to stay in each of those rooms, right? Like that's it. It feels a little bit like a shell game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I was just gonna follow up and comment briefly that I think that's something we should keep in the back of our minds as we continue discussing this, because I know there's understandably an initial emotional response to just the concept of kids and staff being exposed to PCBs, but when you take a step back and you think about the inconsistent results from the testing, and it goes back to the other question of, are they actually being regularly exposed to the amount of PCBs that are concerning? So just a comment, but
Yeah.
yeah, thank
That's
you.
where the averaging perhaps comes in.
Yeah. The other thing I think we got somewhat different information when Dr. Levine was in charge of this program. He came, we had a rather lively conversation with our community and board members about PCBs, and he said one high exposure to PCBs can cause non-cancerous health risks. So things like autoimmune disorders and other things. And so that was brought up again this past summer when the numbers were high and we were told we could be in the building by some staff. And Dr. Levine's replacement, I'm spacing on her name right now, said, well, yes, that in fact is true, but the numbers would have to be 10 times what they are in your building. That would be for an environmental disaster, like a chemical spill or something to that effect. But that wasn't information that was shared with us, right? And when you're a parent or a staff member who hears, right, one-time exposure, high levels, what does that mean, right? And so the messaging around this should be a bit more concise. The information that is shared should also be concise. It's not to throw anyone under the bus. The Agency of Education, the Department of Environmental Conservation, and the Department of Health have been working as hard as they can to support us. It's just, in my opinion, a flawed system, right, that needs some really careful consideration if it is to move forward. Especially since it is very disruptive to the learning environment.
So, okay, you had a question first.
Thank you. So you have 12 schools.
Yep.
You said 5 were tested.
Well, 5, we had more tested, but 5 that tested positive.
That's my real question is, have all of the higher risk, i.e. those that were built before 1980 or after, whatever, after 1980?
That's between the
Before,
20 and
yeah.
1980.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good. Thank you. Have all those higher risk schools facilities been tested?
All of our schools that required testing have been tested. So the 5 of the 12 were the ones that tested positive for higher PCB levels.
Okay, then if you can comment on, because I think your colleague yesterday was commenting on the point in time testing versus the average.
Yes.
I thought from her conversation, at the end of that conversation, he or she, I can't remember, said that they were still at the point in time testing as far as a threshold.
It may be, you heard from Rebecca Fillion, Twin Valley, they may be earlier in the process. We were trying, the summer of 24 to do average levels. We advocated very hard for that because the average might have gotten us able to at least use the building and try to mitigate while we were going along. And the Department of Health didn't feel as though they had enough data sets at that point. We've done data sets ad nauseum at the high school, and so now they feel confident that we have enough data to say it's average. I don't know. I think time of year, humidity levels, right? Air movement, all those things are factors, and we're not really in school for long periods of time when it's really, really hot, right? May sometimes turns out really hot. Sometimes May can be pretty cool and wet. June sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's not, right? But over the hottest periods of the summer, generally we're not in school. So that it feels like that should be and could be taken into consideration. Yeah.
So the question we've been asking witnesses is, we have a bill in front of us.
Mhm.
So I think we've tested about half the schools on the block.
Yeah.
And with, heard a lot about what happens with something when they're not. And so the question in front of us is, in a way, at this point, given, we kind of have two options in front of us. Well, I guess we have three. One would be just to continue the way it is. The other one is to suspend or to end it altogether.
Mhm.
And the other that Pat suggested to us is to tie it to master planning and school construction of the whole regional high school issue and
Yes.
everything else. So we've been asking, including their advice. As somebody who's been through it, what's your advice to us?
I think if you don't stop it all together, you at least need to pause it to come up with a better plan. So what is that plan? What are, when we started doing lead testing and asbestos testing, there's a lot of expert testimony and a process and a procedure. There's not a school in Vermont who doesn't know what to do for lead testing or asbestos testing. And it feels like we're still very much lab rats in a science experiment with PCBs. And it shouldn't feel that way while you're also trying to run school systems, right? And ensure health and safety of both staff and students. So what does that look like in schools? And if you can determine some rules of the game, I think that would help schools that might be navigating it moving forward. If I were a superintendent there are superintendents whose not every school in their SU has been tested yet, or none of them have been tested yet. And so the question in my mind would be, do we have PCBs and should we be worried about them, right? And there are community members who have different reactions, just like during COVID with masks, you had people who were like, this is a conspiracy and I'm not leaving my house ever, right? It's the same with PCBs, people who think, it's a conspiracy, you're out to get a new school, all the way up to, I really worry about my own health or the health and safety of my child. So it's a hard question to answer. It's a hard position for you to be in. The horse is kind of out of the barn, right? You probably know I was a farmer's daughter and I use a lot of adages that my dad would say. It's hard to get the horse back in the barn once it's out. And so you're likely going to get a lot of pressure if you try to stop, right, to continue. But I would encourage you to do the two other options, which is to stop and pause and make sure you have a better process in place. And once you reach a point of no return with a school like North Country, instead of continuing to pour hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars into a school, be thinking about how could we leverage those funds for school construction aid instead. Right? That just seems like a smarter long-term solution.
I'll have more here.
But you do.
More of a committee statement, our job is to set policy. And I don't think we have enough data to set the policy because I'm not a chemist. So I'm thinking that maybe this bill shouldn't even be here. It should be in the Agency of Natural Resources Committee or some other committee where we can get the qualified people to make the decision. I mean, it's a lot of money that's been spent, and we keep going down this road. It's going to get a lot more expensive. To your point, maybe we're better off to save the money and put it in school construction. But how do you prioritize until you know which schools have to be
Correct.
I would actually posit that there's an even better committee than both of ours, which is institutions. That's where the school construction fund used to live, and getting all the relevant experts in to then prioritize how the money is used and which school they're even funding a reconstruction plan for, so we don't keep spending money without solving the problem.
I'm not trying to count all of it. I'm just saying that who might be
Yeah.
Look at this determination. Wow.
I think I am hoping that somewhere in this universe, the institutions committee feels empowered to understand the history of school construction, when it stopped, why it stopped, and what all the conversations have looked like to restart it. Because states that are successful generally tend to have a separate building authority made up of experts on buildings, which isn't either of our committees necessarily.
So what's the limit where you can turn to the federal government and say, hey, I think we got a hazardous waste cleanup site here. You know, because we don't really know, you know, we're just looking at the schools. Could be in the state house, it could be in, you know, the shopping mall. The concern is that the teachers and students are captives in that, right?
Sure.
You know, somebody, maybe institutions should push it up to our federal delegation. I'm not qualified to make that decision. I can't feel confident setting policy with the data I've got.
Well, we have, Michael Reading coming in at 4, we continue the discussion then. Thank you, and I'm actually, Senator, still intrigued with that notion of what it gets me thinking about is the joint hearings next fall with, because it's our policy,
Yeah.
this is ed policy as well.
I mean,
Well,
I'm
it's-
happy
it's
to be part of
cross-jurisdictional.
it.
It's cross jurisdictional.
We should all be thinking
Yeah.
about school buildings.
So that's
Yeah.
interesting thought. So, okay, thank you for coming in.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for actually coming down.
Yes, I prefer to be in person.
And you're very used to driving.
I am.
Much more compelling. Yeah, you went through very.
Yes, it's much easier to read the room and to answer questions as well.
Jamie Connor. So we are shifting gears. And we had our first bit of testimony yesterday. From the technical staff, whether you saw that or not.
Oh, I thought it meant me. 'Cause I
But
was online.
really trying to get a feel for what the school merger process is like, both leading up to the vote and after the vote. And then also thinking about how to attach dollars to those two processes, those two portions of the process, which there's the emphasis, whereas, you know, pull it back and you've been through this, so we're going to get Jack Wilson's been through it. Even we really have big also went through it. So board yours.
All right, thank you, Senator. Jamie Canarney, Superintendent of Schools of the White River Valley Supervisory Union, which serves 10 towns for the White River Valley, not White River Junction. I have to remind folks of that sometimes. And so, yes, Senator, we did merge 2 supervisory unions into one, and we did have during Act 46. We were able to merge into 4 unified school districts. We've worked 10 single town school districts. We merged into 4
You've
unified.
done both.
We have done both.
SU and
We merged the SUs first, which is what your policy proposal talks about.
Yeah.
And then after the two SUs merged, then there was mergers within the SU to unified school districts. So I want to thank your committee for allowing me the opportunity today to talk about Act 73 and the transition mechanisms that will occur within the proposal for school transformation as provided via Act 73, which you've been discussing that for several weeks. I have to take the opportunity to also once again thank you for your hybrid approach to mapping that provides for both supervisory unions and supervisory districts in the future state. And I want to just share my gratitude for that. In addition, I was watching your committee last Friday and want to also share my support and your consideration of either delaying the implementation of minimum class size requirements or eliminating that provision altogether. As was discussed last Friday by Senator Ron Hinsdale, the financial savings will be a result of the implementation of the foundation formula within the bill you're discussing. And the rest of the discussions around the provisions such as minimum class sizes are an unnecessary distraction throughout the future. So thank you for mentioning that.
Oh, thank you for thanking me. Don't get thanked a lot of this.
I'm here today, though, to focus my testimony on what will need to occur at the passage of the bill in order for the newly formed supervisory unions to not only become operational, but also exhibit efficiencies upon their implementation date. That date of implementation as currently drafted is July 1 of 2027. I do want you to think about, as I walk through the idea of what's going to need to happen within these larger SUs, of whether or not that it would make sense for the implementation to occur on July 1, 2028. So to make certain that we don't create new SUs that are running parallel systems, and make certain that they start in regards to operation as being as efficient as possible in regards to providing the service that a supervisory union would provide. So upon organization of these new SUs, there's going to be a great deal of work that will need to occur via the transition boards in order for these newly formed supervisory unions to become as effective and efficient as possible. It would also provide it so that time provided for implementation would also allow your transition boards to get up to speed a bit about what we're actually talking about. As someone who has 31 board members that I serve, it's going to take some time for those folks to realize that we are now creating a transition board for the larger SU. In regards to the map that you have around the Randolph Area Supervisory Union, it has the WRVSU plus the OSSD, the Orange Southwest School District Board, and the Thetford School District Board all coming together. Right now, those boards have to kick off a meeting within 30 days. I'm suggesting that 90 days may be more realistic, especially during the timing of the summer, in order to ensure that those board members are present, number one, and fully engaged in understanding the work ahead. So what is that work ahead? So the work ahead for those transition boards is going to be governing bylaws. And so what are governing bylaws? Things like, remember in state statute, you were talking about this, I believe, about 2 weeks ago when I was sitting in. The SU boards by statute, if you're an operating school district, if you operate any grades, it's 3 members from an operating school district appointed to the SU board. So within the WRVSU, I have 5 operating school districts and 1 that is a non-operating school district, Granville Hancock. Per statute, non-operating school districts have 1 member appointed. There is a provision that can allow a district to petition the state board if they have a larger number of average daily membership makeup within the SU, to have a larger number of voting member seats. Thus far, the state board has not taken action on that type of petition. There was a petition as an example of something just like what I discussed just prior at the Central Vermont Supervisory Union recently, where Payne Mountain School District petitioned the state board to have larger membership on the SU board because CVSU is made up of Payne Mountain and Echo Valley. So there's 4 towns, 2 unified school districts, but Payne Mountain serves Williamstown, Northfield, and has a much larger student population versus Echo Valley, which is a smaller district. State board did not rule on that request because the work that's happened around education transformation. I'm giving you all that context to say the bylaws will help set in stone that type of voting membership. Hopefully you can pull that transition board together and those new board members can decide how they're going to operate. And so there are bylaws on our website that I will share with all of you that will lay out all the things that need to be worked out within the bylaws, which is also how the SU will assess for services. That's decided at the SU level, and each SU does that a bit differently, but that board decides how they want to do that within the bylaws. Some will use average daily membership. Some will use average daily membership plus enrollment, and for some services, some SU still directly bill back to the district based on dollars spent. That would all be sorted in the bylaws, just so you have a little context what I'm talking about with governing bylaws.
When you put together the 2 SUs, did you have a checklist?
I came in right after they were merged.
Okay.
So I did not merge the SU. I have board members that are certainly there as part of the SU, and this is the list they went through. So what I'm giving you is based on their lived experience. Next is policy. This policy typically is set at the SU level. We have a policy on policy that speaks to the SU policy is what governs the work of the SU. That is in order to create more efficiency in regards to the SU operating well. We don't have different district policy, district to district. The district policy is created at the SU level. Curriculum by state statute is set at the supervisory union level. Just want to make certain folks do realize that. So that would need to be, commingled. Special education programming, which you've heard me talk about in regards to the real importance about getting to scale. And I do appreciate that your supervisory union maps will, I think, get us to scale in regards to being able to provide really efficient programming that delivers better outcomes for our students, but also is able to do it in a more efficient manner. We won't be so reluctant on needing to contract services for special education programming, more in-house programs. But that's going to need to be designed. You don't want to have mergers happen and in a year you're still running parallel operations because you haven't pulled those things together yet. Part of what will also happen at the SU level typically is collective bargaining agreements. We only have one SU still in the state right now that has multiple collective bargaining agreements. The rest of them are now bargaining at the SU level. That again results in more efficiency and better climate, frankly. And then fiscal operations, including accounts payable, payroll, and accounting software change.
So we have, sticking to this part of your testimony, the SU merger portion, we have a number in there. I think it would have quite so if we have $250,000 for that process. And what's your reaction to that?
I think that makes sense. Yep. And that's what my testimony says. You have a number in there for 250,000, and then I think you have a number in there when you talk about like school districts, unified school districts that also have a supervisory capacity, right? Of 300,000. Within your SU, all this work that I'm talking about, fiscal operations, budgeting, school information systems is also really important. That's all going to happen at the SU level. It's not going to happen at the district mergers that are going to occur within those SUs. And so within my testimony, I think the 250,000 makes a great deal of sense in regards to a grant that will allow us to have consultation with experts, including people, at the SU level. What I go on to talk about in regards to the voluntary mergers of school districts within the SU level is that they're going to need to also contract some professional facilitation to lead those study committees, and they're going to have some legal needs. But that transition grant is not going to need to be at the level if it's going to be in regards to like a supervisory district, right? Because we've already done all that other work at the supervisory union level that I just outlined. Okay, so I'm recommending at that area that you would think about like 40 to 50,000 for the facilitation, really, of the study committees, the legal needs, and then I would also encourage you to put some type of sum of money. I put 20,000 in my testimony as placeholder for making certain that the school district has some funds to start rebranding. We have
So that your shift, the 40 to 50 is leading up to the vote.
the 40 to 50 is leading up to the vote,
20 is out.
and the 20 would be if they successfully merge. And what I have found out in regards to doing those merged unified districts within the SU is that rebranding is incredibly important. That part of that work with the study committee needs to be re-envisioning a roadmap for success. And in order to do that, I think that they have to work to create what is that new unified district's mission and vision. And we need to rebrand so that there is a new identity. When we continue to live in the past in regards to after unified district mergers have occurred, we don't deliver on the promise of more efficiency and opportunity. And I have lived that in regards to coming in as a superintendent where a district had done that. and then lived it helping a district that had not done that in the first branch unified district. Chelsea and Tunbridge ran totally parallel K-8 programs 8 miles up the road from each other. And we worked with them to get them to create a unified elementary in Tunbridge that operates K-4, and then a unified middle school at Chelsea to be able to provide better programming. We've resulted in more efficiency, so we're able to invest that to get more opportunities for kids. But that needed us to create what is the actual identity for the first branch unified district. And so that work is important, and some rebranding funds I think will help after this. And so again, the big lift at the supervisory union merger level will be at the SU level. And so the 250 makes sense. Those voluntary district mergers after within the SU boundaries do not need $300,000.
Yeah, that's out. Okay.
It is out. Okay. All right. Thank you, Senator. It was in the latest. I can't keep up with those guys.
We can't either.
All right. Well, so when I referenced that, I'm sorry. That's what I was focused on before. And so any questions about that part of the testimony in regards to what will happen at the SU level in regards to the transitioning versus the inside the voluntary mergers that will happen with inside the SUs? All right. Before I wrap up, I got a couple other quick points if I can make them.
Can I ask you about the points that you've already made?
Yeah.
So the effective operational date of July 1, 2028. That's what's already written into Act 73. Right.
For the SUs, I think right now it's currently place held at 2027 for the SUs.
In the draft legislation or in the
Draft legislation.
Act 73 as
No, that, the new SUs, because this was looking to the map that never happened. So the draft language for SU, the new SUs on the map that we're looking at this committee, we had the starting effective date for the new SUs as July 1, 2027, and you're suggesting moving it to July 1, 2028.
Yeah, just to ensure, because and just so I can give some context, I could see by July 128, we've created a new board and a superintendent's been hired, but none of that other work will have taken place yet about policy, curriculum, special education, fiscal operations. So I could see as an example in the Randolph area, having a business office still operating in Randolph and a business office still operating in South Royalton, because we wouldn't have pulled those together yet. So I'm just saying, if you give an additional year to allow for that board to actually pull those things together, we won't be stuck running parallel systems, like building the plane while we're flying it. It will have been built.
Yeah, and then another question on the 250,000 for a newly enacted SU. Does it matter what size the SU is? How many facilities? How many principals? How many students? How many districts? Does any of that matter?
I don't believe so, because you're still going to have to do all that work above. You're still going to be pulling different entities. Every one of your SUs is pulling multiple entities together. And so whether you're pulling 2 larger SUs together or 3 or 4, I still see the same.
Okay.
That's a couple other points.
Couple other points. I had to take the opportunity to appreciate and acknowledge that in your policy proposal, that the state board is taking into consideration the geography of non-contiguous like operating districts under section 10.3B. But I would like to encourage you to consider removing the do not need to be contiguous from that section altogether. And so I feel to see how the merging of non-contiguous like operators through potential merger by the state board is needed. If districts choose to do it voluntarily, then support that work. But having an example in the WRVSU is currently constructed, I have a K6 operating district in Sharon and a unified K6 operating district in Rochester Stockbridge. In South Royalton and Bethel sit between them. And it's almost a 40-minute drive from Sharon to get to Rochester. And I don't think if the state board decided, and that's why I appreciate the geography part there, hopefully they wouldn't decide to do this, but I would feel much better if you just removed it so it couldn't be done that way, because I don't see any efficiency gained in a K6 operator in Rochester and a K6 operator in Sharon. And so I'm just advocating that under that section, there's a part that you say do not need to be contiguous. You just remove that and make them that they do need to be contiguous like operators. Just put that out there for under consideration. And then, you know,
Be closer than that in some instances.
sometimes there may be just one town, but I worry about how we toughen up in the geography statement.
Okay, one taken.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd like to think if they are closer, that they will voluntarily try to merge. And, you know, it comes down to, again, what Senator said last week, that in these larger SUs, that's where the efficiency is really going to be found. And the foundation formula, because these new larger SUs are going to operate a lot like CSAS. And merging.
Saying that, I've been yelled at for saying that, not by anyone.
Well, I
here.
make it. I don't know. But merging some of these rural districts that don't decide to merge voluntarily is not going to save any more money for the state. I get that it feels better in regards to the implementation of the foundation formula, but if these districts believe that they can be effective and provide good programming for kids and operate in a highly effective SU, I don't see anything other than voluntary needing to happen, because it's not going to change the bottom line of that SU footprint. And
You said it again.
that within these SUs, like for example, I'll keep using the Randolph area one because that's part of the one I serve, that foundation formula is going to be spread amongst those districts within that SU. And if that SU runs really efficiently, which is the goal, the SU assessment will stay low so that more dollars will be forward facing the kids. I don't see any additional savings, as an example, merging Sharon School District that operates K6 and Rochester Stockbridge that operates a K6 that has two towns in between them. That's going to save any more additional funds. So force merging them, I don't see any benefit to that. The foundation formula will be provided to the K6 operator in Rochester Stockbridge, the K6 operator in Sharon. And if they can still provide high quality programming for their kids, the size of their district isn't going to matter. Am I making sense with that? The sum of money coming from Montpelier will still be the same for those 14 towns within that SU, whether they're one district or they're 10 districts.
So you're also saying, I think your preface to that was that the efficiency really is gained at the SU level.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're all at scale of point.
Yeah, and I appreciate Senator Weeks has said so many times, this is not about closing schools. And I've appreciated that. He's stated that so many times. And so there's where I'm saying, let's find the efficiencies within that SU area and let those districts that need to merge to find additional efficiency, they'll merge. They will go work together and merge or figure out creative ways to provide programming for kids. We're not going to need to unilaterally have to just force them. And it's not going to change the bottom dollar for the amount of money those towns and districts are receiving within that SU boundary. It will be the same whether they're 2 districts in that SU or 6 districts in that SU.
Yes.
I didn't want to interrupt him because he's got another comment. You got your final paragraph. You want a question? I'm not quite sure he's got it.
That's essentially what I was just
Town
emphasizing.
vote. So town vote is what I wanted to ask you. So let's say hypothetically we get to a larger SU. It's got a bigger geographic footprint. The superintendent, you know, professional as they are, they start to take a look at the different schools that are in their portfolio. What do you think should be the process for that superintendent to say, hey, look, you know, we really got to take these schools, let's hypothetically say there's 10 of them, and in the end, there's going to be 7 of them, or whatever. It's all hypothetical. the need of the town vote to affect that change? How critical is that town vote versus the superintendent being trusted to start moving the ball rolling in that direction? Where is the town vote? How relevant is it?
So the town vote for me here is talking about actual mergers via what's currently in statute with study committees is what we're
Right.
talking about. But in regards to closing schools, I believe in local democracy, and I believe that through the work of building trust with the communities and studying the problem, I have come to learn that Vermonters are really supportive in regards to making changes. The example I can give you is in First Branch. This is the real lived example I can give you. Chelsea had just lost its high school. They were really upset about it. You heard some of this when you were at White River from some Chelsea students. But when I could sit down and work with them and create a committee and create a plan and show them the savings and better programming for those kids, they supported the idea and notion of us having elementary students in Tunbridge and middle school students in Chelsea. And Chelsea felt like they just lost their elementary school. That's how they described it. But by them having a stake in it and a voice in it, they have now bought into the merger. They are incredibly proud of their district.
Okay, so again, you take everyone back to the hypothetical of a larger SU. It's got multiple districts that have multiple facilities all feeding into it. If it were as simple as you say, that people understand, they get it, that they'll make the right decisions based on their understanding of the time. Why hasn't this happened, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago? Why haven't the districts already realized that for the benefit of the student, they need to start talking about district mergers?
I think a lot of them have, and in my area they have. That's my point. I think that a lot of schools did a lot of really good work over the last decade in regards to creating mergers. And
I'll accept that. Obviously, we're all dealing with different geographic and school, realities. Some are moving faster and reaping benefits, some are not, and the gap's getting big.
and I understand different points in the state.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That was helpful. Thank you for coming in. Thanks for time.
Good to see you. And isolate, I use your mind.
I pulled it.
But,
So she might have.
just know.
I'm not separate, so.
Yeah.
It's actually better.
Yeah, you always share that in the, I was inspiring soup,
Oh.
and I
Yeah.
use that. It's very effective.
Yeah.
Like, it's seriously, it's has to do it. I choose. And Elaine Pinkney, retired superintendent. I was for the last 15 years of my career superintendent of the Champlain Valley School District, which is formerly Chittenden South Supervisory Union. Previous to that, I was a principal in Williston, a principal in Stowe, a principal in Morrisville, a bilingual director in Canaan, teacher in Stowe and Canaan. I'm from Canaan, Vermont. I graduated from Canaan High School. I know that area of the state and I.
How big was your class when you graduated?
24.
Okay.
24, probably can name them all. So I feel like I'm a Vermonter. I know that. I think I've been asked here today to speak to the merger that Chittenden South did in 2014, the official merger that went into Champlain Valley School District. Is that true?
Well, frankly, Jackie Reason suggested you, and she said, Jackie Wilson,
Oh, yeah.
and then you've been through this
Yeah.
process. But I'm just looking for
Yeah.
people who've been through
Okay.
the process. And so what we're really trying to, so we just want to really understand what's involved in the process of
Yeah.
merging two districts. And also, and think about it as the leading up to the vote and then after the vote.
Right.
And part of it is the dollars we should assign to it, but it's even
Yeah.
more, just that we really understand all the pieces involved. So we're looking for real understanding of the process and then then we do want to think about what dollars. to-
So let me just, I think you've got my little page. I didn't even know if you needed that, but I just thought it was really helpful. So we're talking about something that happened over, 20 years ago for us in terms of where it started. So I just want that on the table because I did spend a little time remembering and reached out to a couple people. But I will say this, our merger was easy. Every town, including St. George, that had high school choice, voted overwhelmingly to merge. And I believe that's because we started, my predecessor had started, Brian Reagan, back in 2003, let's say, started doing things in the supervisory union that started establishing the picture of we are one, right? We would even do CSSYOU instead of CSSU, things like that. By the time I came on board in 2006, he had already convinced the boards to hold their meetings together. So obviously the SU board had to meet separately, and then the local boards that they met in one place. And the high school cafeteria fixed a very modest dinner for people so that they encouraged people to come. So more and more of the other board members would come to the SU board meeting, then they would go to their separate rooms and have their boards. When I came on board, I started meeting with the board chairs. So at that time I had 7 board chairs and we met with them monthly, and we had like the rules at the bottom where we meet to like share common concerns, to get update about like, hey, what's going on at the legislature, what's going on at the AOE. But we're not doing board work at these meetings. But what came of that was a camaraderie amongst these board chairs, right? So again, like that sense of us instead of like we're all separate people. A lot of that work had already been done. I was meeting with my principals for full days once a month and letting them be part of like the agenda planning so that they really felt committed to, we are one entity. So we were doing curriculum, the contract had been unified. We were still working through some of the things because a contract is a bear. Even though it's Chittenden County and you can imagine that like, oh, you think that if they're all the same, they weren't. There was a big difference between Shelburne and Charlotte and Heinsberg at the time in terms of their contracts. Yes, go ahead. A collective bargaining agreement with teachers and support staff. So that's a big thing, right? Like, so it took years. I would say 10 years at least, more than that for some like little things, but 10 years at least to get like the salaries all up to in place. So that was all done pre-merger. We had a unified contract. We had a system for doing budgeting that was the same for all the boards. So if we were talking about technology in the second week in October in Charlotte, we were talking about technology in Williston, Shelburne, Heinsberg, CVU, and SU. So that like people could have a common conversation about, and what does this look like? So when we came out with SSU assessments at the time, no surprise, right? We did the same thing with curriculum and professional development. And I'm not saying it's easy. I mean, I remember one board that said, we're not doing that program. And I remember saying, with the support of the other board members, that's okay. You don't have to, but our professional development from the SU is going to be on this program. The teacher's going to come, but we're not doing 2 separate. Those are the efficiencies people don't think about. Like if you could be laser focused on what you're doing, you could do a much better job than if every one of those schools at one time had a totally different math program, a totally different reading program. You could call that teaching the teacher's way, right? It wasn't a system, it was just, so all of that had been done. All of which to say made merger when it came, and the opportunity to get 10 cents off the tax rate year 1, 8 cents year 2, 6 cents. That all helped, right? I will say the big conversations, and I think I wrote it down here at one point, because we've done a lot of work around culture at the board level, at the teacher level, at the leader level. That felt really like we were in a good place. The big things that we had to talk about were equity and autonomy, So how do we make sure that we have equity for all our kids, which, you know, like, with all due respect, isn't that what all of this is about? What are we doing for kids and education? So for me, that's where my heart is and what I care about. Like, what are we doing that's going to make things better for kids? So how do we make sure that we have equity for our kids while maintaining autonomy? And that rings true in every town in Vermont. We don't want cookie cutter schools. That thing that they do in Williston with their after school program at the time, where teachers could get a half day off on Friday if they ran the after school 4 days a week, they wanted to still be able to do that. And what does that look like? And how do you even? So that was a promise that I made and my team made to that committee that was doing it, was that we will figure something out. I can't tell you now because it seems like it's daunting, but we will figure something out. So equity and autonomy, which we did figure out. And the other thing was there were different per pupil costs in each of the schools. Some were very high, some were very low. Lucky for us, the ones that were very low also had like the worst facilities and needed the most facilities help. And so we had a couple board members that were like the numbers people, and I worked with a tremendously competent CFO who really could take all this, lay it out, and show like, okay, so this is what it looks like in terms of the per pupil, but here's what it looks like side by side with like what the facilities needs are. And it really was pretty much of a wash. Right? Like you could say, yes, it's true that you've got low, but you've got like something breathing down your neck that's going to cost all these other districts. And so they framed that out so that people could understand. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to pause you on equity just for a moment longer. Like, you know, what did that look like in your discussions vis-a-vis what you think it looked like in other parts of the state? I mean, sometimes it's bus miles traveled, or, you know, like what were some of those things that we might not even be thinking about?
So for us, it really was about our kids learning to read, write, do math, critically problem solve, and be ready for, you know, citizenship in the United States. That's for me, that's at the core of it.
Did it feel hard to say, like, your kids aren't doing, like, what is the answer then?
So we had already been doing a lot of work.
Okay.
I was telling you, like, I hate to even say this out loud. If somebody taking notes, I don't like saying this out loud, but like when I first,
it is recorded on Zoom.
so I'm just going to say
YouTube.
hypothetically in my situation, right? There were towns that were seen by the kids themselves. And I had two teenagers that went through CPU high school. I moved to Williston when my older son was in 8th grade, my younger son was in 5th grade. They both went through. And so they were both athletes. I was very connected to the community and parent groups. And I can tell you that the kids going to CVU had a sense that kids from certain towns were way better prepared than kids from others. And it was well known. And the people in the community where the kids believed that their kids weren't well prepared, they knew that was being said. So we weren't dealing with a deep, dark secret, but we were dealing with like, well, you've got to fix that. And one of the ways that I dealt with that, I'm not the only one that ever dealt with it, but one of the ways I dealt with it was to keep reminding people, all of our kids were sitting cheek by jowl at CVU in those same classes. That's one scenario. And it's important that they're prepared in Algebra 1 or geometry in the same way, because otherwise that teacher's going to have to spend a lot of time. That's one scenario. And another one is all of our kids are at CVU. And if we have to like water down like the offering so much, that's not best for our kids either. And by that, I mean, like in one community, you could have world language up through French or Spanish too. In another community, you got no French, no world language. Same thing with math. Some kids were going to CVU with opportunities that put them right into geometry or even Algebra 2, and other kids who haven't had any geometry at all. It's taxing on a system. And if it's taxing on a system as big as CVU, imagine how taxing it is on Canaan High School to make. So important. So driving home that piece about the equity all the way through, how that maximizes then what your kids can have. So that was one thing. So the facilities, the per pupil cost, the autonomy piece, how we're gonna deal with that. And seems like there was one other piece that was.
Also, I think your
Yeah,
main point is the same, I think, you know, that the real work is done leading up to the vote to merge.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that like, and I can't speak for other people who have merged, because maybe some people merged without having done all that pre-work, and then on that day one is when it all starts. And maybe they were very successful. I guess I always look at it, and even back then, I would say to people, there's more than one way to do this. You can do it slowly, or you can do it all at once. I guess my own philosophy is just do it. However, and I'm not a big supporter of like all the off grants. I do work now consulting with school boards. I do superintendent searches. I worked most recently with Grand Isle on, the work with the community around whether they would close a school or not. And it just strikes me as inefficient to have a place like Grand Isle that is, it's an island. And yet they have to have 4 boards because they have 2 K6s and 2 K8s, and they need SU. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like as a superintendent, there would have been more work because two of them are K6, 2 of them are K8. To me, honestly, in my humble opinion, that's an excuse not to merge. That is just an excuse not to merge. They're contiguous. They consider themselves islanders. Anyways, I know that's a little bit off, but.
Do you think there's like sensitive equity questions there that district
In Grand Isle.
will,
Okay,
okay, yeah, in general.
In general.
Yeah, I mean, in general, that, like, right, my husband's a CPU grad,
Okay.
and talking to him one time about his high school experience, I thought, wow, there's a lot of class dynamics going on in that school.
I think that's gonna be true everywhere.
Yeah, so I guess I'm
That was
wondering,
true in Morrisville, that was true in Stowe.
what
It was
do you,
Somewhat true in Canaan, although the smaller you get, the less, you have only so many friends, so.
I agree, it's probably everywhere, and do you think it's underneath some of the conversations about not merging?
I think in some
District.
cases it can be. That gets to like, I might have put culture in all caps. Oh my gosh, building the culture that how big is our world? We are a little toy state. How big is our world, right? Shouldn't we be looking out for every kid in Vermont? But to me, that's the North Star. And yes, there are going to be things like that, but if we can offer them a great education and lots of opportunities, that goes a long way towards,
And what defines everybody's that great education? Because everybody's a little different, but if you had to say, here's a core to a great education, what would you go? These are the 4 or
I
5
want every
things.
kid to be able to read, and there should be markers along the way, right? So like we know that 3rd grade, and if 3rd grade is big marker, can they read on grade level at end of 3rd grade is going to like be connected together. Going to college, how they're doing on their SATs and whether even they take algebra, even though it's free. I want every kid to be able to read confidently, do math. You need to do some level of math, and it needs to be math problem solve. So those critical kind of thinking skills, be good citizens. I don't think that we've done a great job with that. Somebody asked me quite a few years ago, did we miss, as educators, did we miss the bus on like teaching civics? And back then I went like, what are they blaming us again? And today I would say, yes, we did. We missed that bus. So that's
Okay,
big, Horace
right,
Mann
it's
kind of
big,
stuff.
but what I'm trying is equity and equality.
Mhm.
And it's such a moving scale because you go like, hey, go to CVU. They have a huge list of opportunities. Go up to Canaan, they do not have. But if we had, what I'm saying is if you go, because we talked to the students up in Canaan and they're like, we have everything we need.
I agree.
So what it comes down to is that we as
But they can read, do math, think critically, problem solve, and no, here's another piece, and I'm not a fan of like career training in school. That's not it. I'm sorry if I'm, pushing on anybody's buttons there. But I am a fan of making sure that kids know there are lots of different jobs out there, and you, whether you're from Canaan, Vermont or Shelburne, you can do that.
So, yes, and I believe any school we went to, the schools are amazing. They all make. However, it's like, should we say this is what defines the school being equal and equitable, that they're offering these 5 things, then, all the arts, all the sports and everything else on top that gives your child even more variety.
You're pushing on the autonomy piece of that whole thing.
Well, I'm pushing that's
Yeah.
what we get is, oh, you're going to CVU, you're getting a lot better education. No, it's not.
I don't
But-
really agree with
But
that.
you have some people go, well, I want what they want. Why isn't my school offering it?
And I think they would ask that question less if they felt their kids were getting what they needed and felt whole and felt like they were involved in the school and were doing important things and felt good about themselves. The kids in Canaan said to you, no, we got everything we needed, right? They didn't say, oh, we don't have a hockey team, we don't have a football team, we don't have a lacrosse team, they didn't say that. They say we play soccer, we play basketball,
Yeah.
we have a forestry program that is really.
But then you get the occasional, always a but.
I know.
But you get the parent that might say, I want more opportunities for my child. Now I'm not feeling
Well,
what CVU is getting, but as a system, we say 4 or 5, these are that is your child knows how to read, math skills, social
Right.
skills, and because all that other stuff, once you know how to read, math, and problem solve, the door, like you said, opens up.
Can I try to define that a little bit? How about like reading at grade or math at grade level? As opposed to how many AP courses?
yeah.
What's the right metric?
Well, I do think that like, this is not a talking about, but I do think that we should be testing kids in reading and math and having opportunities for intervention for those kids who aren't there. And the intervention can't just be like, oh, you get an extra 20 minutes of this same thing, but 20 minutes of like, what are you missing? What is it that you're not getting? Because like, especially in math, like I'm building misconception upon misconception is not, giving them an extra hour a day is not going to help that. It really needs to be very focused on where are you in terms of like number theory or all of that kind of stuff, and then provide the intervention for that. I believe pretty strong.
Yeah, so much better informed intervention.
Right.
Yeah.
Based on the kid's own needs.
Yeah.
Not like, okay, today we're all going to do fractions again, because maybe 2 of you missed it. And 2 of you don't even know what you're talking about. And the rest of you are like, I already did this.
I think that's a really interesting topic and one we
But I do think it gets to that equity thing, which I think is an important thing, that, what does equity look like? And especially if you start talking about money. So one of the things we did is we normalized teacher salaries, for example, so that we had a spreadsheet that had like each of the schools. How many teachers did they have? Teachers. And we said every teacher is worth $65,000. So we didn't say, oh, some of them get paid 80, some of them get paid 42. No, all of them 65. How many guidance counselors do you have? And we had a number for that. How many principals, how many paraeducators, whatever. So now when you've got that all in there, say how many students do you have? And you divide by, right? And so we had that number year 1. And then we shared that with only the principals. All the principals got to see each other's numbers. And they could see that there were a couple of schools that were spending a lot more money than others, but we shared like the methodology with the boards, but not the numbers. Because you need that time, right? You can't like institute something like that and right away show how it looks, right? But so what happened from that, and that gets to that culture piece of like, we are all together. Those principals knew that like when there was an opportunity to move, like positions from one school to another, now that we're in SD, we're going to do that. And so what happened one year is one of the schools that had, compared to the others, more per pupil guidance than any of the other schools. And their guidance counselor retired. And those administrators came to me and said, we see the writing on the wall. How about as a halfway step, we only hire for a pack? and we share it with this other school that is clearly low compared to everybody else. So stuff like that started happening. You can do that if you've got a big system. In a small system, like what is there to move around?
We're trying to get to some scale. Yeah, that's the answer.
Yes.
Capacity.
Yeah.
So I think you're bringing a really interesting perspective to the committee because you've had time to reflect on your career. You're not under
Yeah.
immediate personal pressure, blah, blah, blah. You've been able to, think about this. And I'd like you, if you could, because I'm sure you're aware, Senator Heffernan's got a single district, single unified statewide.
Where are you?
Hmm?
Where are you?
Where-
No.
No, one unified system, all Vermont.
It's a proposal. So you can talk about maps. It's a map with the outline of Vermont. I'm just wondering if
One district?
one district.
One unified system.
So here's, well, I think that the system itself should be unified at some level, right? I mean, I think we are Vermont, it should be one, we should be thinking about what's our purpose and, like, okay, what's our needs, the student needs, and what's our, the taxpayers, what will they afford? I think there's a line in Act 46 that the best possible education you could provide at a cost the taxpayer will support. In the end, that's where we are. I think one system in terms of governance is too big, personally. I think that I just know the work that I did as a superintendent. I say, and I mean no disrespect to any other state, because I'm sure there are plenty of states that also have superintendents who they dig into the work. I feel like in Vermont, the superintendents work with their principals, with their teachers. They're not out there
Well,
just
if I had the premise that one superintendent, but then they'll have
a lot of assistants.
administrators that are dedicated to a certain region
Yes.
to fill that 2,000 to 4,000,
Yeah.
whatever works best. And that's
I
who
like that
they,
number, by the way.
they answer to them and it works up, which is
Well, how does the Secretary of Education play into that?
that's who the superintendent.
Would work with.
Yep. And then disseminating all the
Yeah.
information goes a lot quicker than it does now. But we're working on,
Yeah.
as much as I'd love to take mine and run with it,
Yeah, yeah.
in this building,
It's-
it's not gonna fly
Yeah.
quite yet.
And it could be that it builds up that way. I don't know. I just think that I like the more recent map with like 14 or 16 or 20 or whatever better than. My personal opinion is, I don't think that like Chittenden County ought to have schools of 10,000. And not because of workload or anything else. The rest of the state already thinks that Chittenden County is the tail that's wagging the dog. And to just make a bigger district there just invites that even more. We should be more like everybody else, not even more different. That's my opinion.
So weeks, one more.
Thanks, sir. So as a superintendent, you had a variety of principals who reported into your schools.
Yeah.
So what keep me into asking you this next question is the fact that you mentioned 2,000, 4,000 as being the sweet spot for,
Well, I just like that better than what I'd seen before.
okay, but that's the number of students. I'm wondering if the perspective should be the number of principals that the superintendent manages, as opposed to the number of students that are underneath those principals.
It probably should be related.
Okay.
They probably should be related. If the principals do it, also we have in Vermont, like hands-on principals at home, right? Who are in classrooms, who are working with teachers, who are modeling, here's how we do business here. And who are collaborative and work with other principals in the organization. So how many did I have? Like all together, probably, I don't know. 20 administrators, because when we met all of us. So even the business manager met with us. And initially I got pushback from that, but I will tell you in short order, they went, I love these meetings.
Good.
I understand now like how it all works
So
together.
how many principals? Is
Principals, I had 6 principals, 6 assistant or co-principals. Curriculum director, special ed director. HR manager.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in.
You know,
Very informative.
Okay, we'll take a quick break.
I didn't just
I'm just saying,
Yes.
somebody.
Yeah.
Yes. I will.
Quick break. Let's really make it only till 4 because we have